Hello everyone, my name is Juliana Zinchenko and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I will be showing you how to sew a centered zipper, also known as a railroad zipper. You'll usually see centered zippers in the back of skirts or dresses. Here I used a centered zipper for the back of a top that I made. I recently just did one on this circle skirt that I made. 90% of the time I go for an invisible zipper. I have a tutorial on that as well. You can check it out after this video. But a centered zipper is perfect for when you're working with a thicker fabric. Let's get into the tutorial. All right, before we get started, here is a list of everything that I use in this video. I will also have links below so you guys can get exactly what I'm using. All right, so here are my two pieces of fabric. Let's pretend these two pieces are a part of a circle skirt and we are adding a zipper to the back seam. The first step is to add on strips of interfacing. You want your strips of interfacing to be 1/4 inch longer than your seam allowance. So my seam allowance is going to be 3/4 of an inch, so I'm just going to add on 1/4 inch, which will make it 1 inch. I will be using fusible interfacing, which means that you can iron it to your fabric and it will stick to it, which is really nice. I love to add interfacing anytime I'm doing a zipper because it makes the zipper area sturdier. Make sure you add the interfacing to the wrong side of the fabric. And now we're going to iron it down. When you get fusible interfacing, you will notice that there is a side that is smooth and a side that is a little bit rougher and it has a bunch of like teeny dots. The side that has like a bunch of tiny dots is the fusible side. So you want that side to be facing down on your fabric when you're ironing. As you can see, the interfacing is fused to the fabric, so we don't have to worry about it coming off. And what I'm going to do is finish off the raw edges of the seam allowance with my serger. I'm just tying up the serger tails right here. Then we're going to draw our seam allowance line using fabric chalk. My seam allowance is going to be 3/4 of an inch, so I'm just going to measure 3/4 of an inch from the serged edge and then draw a line. Now what we're going to do is put the right sides of the fabric together, and then we're going to mark where we want the zipper to stop. So you want to measure how long you want your zipper to be. Let's say the zipper starts at our waist. You usually want to do about 7 to 8 inches. I am going to do 7 inches here. Then we're going to stitch along the seam allowance line. You're going to start the stitch with a basting stitch. Don't forget to backstitch at the very beginning. And then you're going to sew until you hit that horizontal line that we drew where the zipper is going to stop. Then you're going to backstitch again, and then you're going to decrease your stitch length back to a regular stitch, which is usually around 2.5 millimeters to 3.0 millimeters. That's up to you. And then at the end, you want to backstitch one more time. Now for my beginners, all a basting stitch is just a regular straight stitch, but just with a very long stitch length. You can baste by hand and on the sewing machine. For this zipper, we're going to be doing it both ways. No matter how much experience you have, I always recommend pinning your fabric so that it stays in place while you're sewing. And then to give you guys some tips before we start sewing, you want to make sure that your top thread is underneath the presser foot and that it's going towards the back of your machine. And then to grab the bobbin thread, you're going to lower your needle into the machine and then lift it up. And then you're going to grab both the threads underneath the presser foot. You can even take your presser foot off for this step. It's much easier to grab the thread. And then you're going to see that it pulls out the bottom thread, and then you're going to want to pull that out as well. And then both threads you want to be under the presser foot going towards the back of your machine. To get a basting stitch on the sewing machine, you just want to increase your stitch length to the highest number it will go to. On my sewing machine, it is 5.0 millimeters. I always like to use the lines they give you on the throat plate as a guide. So I'm just going to pick a line and align the edge of my fabric to that line. And then I'm going to move the needle so that it's right above the line that we drew. And I'm even going to lower my needle into the fabric just a little bit just to see if it hits that line, and it does, so we are all good to go. This is just extra stuff that will help you sew a very straight line. And for my beginners, the reason we backstitch is so that the stitch doesn't unravel. So you always want to make sure you backstitch at the beginning and end of your seam. Okay, so once you reach that horizontal line that we drew, you want to pass that line just a little bit. I would say about 3 stitches past the line. And then this is the part where we go back to a regular stitch. So I'm just going to decrease my stitch length to 2.5. And then you're going to backstitch until you hit the line. And then you're just going to continue sewing and finish up your seam. I'm just clipping the loose threads at the ends of my seam here. This is what it looks like when we're all finished. As you can see here, I have that backstitch where our zipper will stop. I even will backstitch a couple times here because backstitches are also great for any area that is going to experience a lot of stress. Moving on to step 5, we're just going to open up the seam and iron it down. When ironing, my favorite thing to use is a tailor's clapper. It makes anything that you're ironing super flat and crisp. Like, tell me this flat seam is not so satisfying. All right, moving on to step 6, we're just going to use a pin to mark where we backstitched on the inside and on the outside. Now, a lot of fabric chalk doesn't come out. I'll use fabric chalk on the inside where no one's going to see it. But on the outside, I do use a disappearing marker. I will have the one I use linked below. As you can see here, I marked on the inside, and then I'm going to poke the pin through the fabric so that I can see on the outside where I need to mark the end of the zipper. And this is the disappearing marker that I use. Moving on to step 7, we're going to use the disappearing marker to draw a guideline of where we are going to sew on the outside. Now the measurement is up to you. What I recommend is either a 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch from the seam line. In this tutorial, I decided to do a 1/4 inch, so I'm just going to find that measurement on my clear ruler and then draw a line until it hits that horizontal mark where our zipper is going to stop, and then do the same thing on the other side of the seam. And this is what it should look like when you're done drawing your guideline. All right, now we're getting to the fun part. You want to grab your zipper and you want to make sure that your zipper stop at the end there, that's that like metal piece at the end, is a little bit past that horizontal line that we drew. So you want to make sure that your zipper is a little bit longer than your measurement. As you can see here, the zipper stop is a little bit past that horizontal line, and the top of the zipper will align with the top of your fabric. This is where you're going to add a waistband or a facing. And in order to do that, you're going to need that room at the top. Now, the zipper I have here is the perfect size, but for the sake of this video, I want to show you guys that you can get a really long zipper and just cut it to whatever length that you want. And I will show you at the end how to finish the bottom of the zipper and how to create your own zipper stop. So the zipper I have here is 20 inches long. As you can see here, it is way too long. So I'm just going to cut it so that it matches the other zipper that I had because that zipper was the perfect length. Now, once you've cut your zipper, be careful not to unzip it all the way because you won't be able to zip it back up. We do not have a zipper stop at the end there yet, so be careful not to do that. Now for step 8, we're going to want to place the zipper right in the middle of the seam there. And you want to make sure that the zipper teeth are facing down. So if you can see the zipper teeth, the zipper is the wrong way. And you want to make sure that the middle of the zipper, so the zipper teeth, is in perfect alignment with that seam line. Next, we're going to hand sew a basting stitch. And when you hand sew a basting stitch, you just want to make long, loose stitches. Remember, a basting stitch is just to temporarily hold the fabric together. And then you're going to start sewing the zipper to all of the layers of fabric. So you want to be able to see your basting stitch from the other side. And as you can see here at the start, I do go over the stitch one more time. So it's like a back stitch. And I'm sewing on the very edge of my zipper because I do not want to hit that guideline that we drew on the other side. That is where we are going to be sewing. So once we top stitch, I do not want my top stitch to interfere with my basting stitch. As you can see here, my stitches are long and loose and no need to make them look perfect. We're going to be taking this out anyway. It is just to help us keep the zipper in place. And then I'm going to go over the stitch at the end one more time so it acts as a back stitch and my basting stitch won't unravel. And then I'm just going to tie a knot and clip off the loose threads. All right, this is what it should look like when you're all finished. As you can see, the basting stitch is on the outside of that guideline. It is not interfering with it at all. And all we have to do is do the same thing on the other side of the zipper. This is what it should look like when you are all finished. And now what I'm going to do is change out my regular presser foot with a zipper presser foot. There's a lot of different types of zipper foots, but I like to use this really skinny one for the centered zipper. Next, I'm going to take my sewing stiletto. This is going to help us reach places that our fingers can't while we are sewing. So our next step is top stitching from the front where we drew our guideline. So what I'm going to do is use my presser foot to help me sew a straight line. So I'm going to align the edge of my presser foot with the edge of my guideline, as you can see here. Then what I'm going to do is position my needle so that it is also in line with the presser foot and the guideline. And like we've done before, I'm just going to lower my needle in the fabric just a little bit to see if it hits the guideline. So our zipper pull is right in this area here, and I'm going to be using the sewing stiletto to push it to the side so that I create this nice flat area that my needle can sew through. Now don't forget to backstitch at the beginning of this stitch. As you can see here, I'm pushing my zipper pull to the left so that it doesn't get in the way of my presser foot. And of course, normally I would choose a thread color that matches my fabric, but for the sake of this video so that you guys can see, I went with a contrasting color. Okay, so now I'm going to teach you guys how to sew a corner. What you want to do is you want to sew right up to that corner. Then you want to make sure that your needle is lowered into the fabric. Do not raise it. Then you're going to pick up your presser foot using the lever in the back of your machine. Swing your fabric around until the guideline and the presser foot are lined up once again, just like we did at the beginning. Lower your presser foot and then continue sewing. And then you're going to do the same thing when you hit that other corner. So up to that corner point, make sure your needle is lowered into the fabric. Pick up the presser foot, swing the fabric around, lower the presser foot, and continue sewing. Don't let the speed of my clips fool you. The slower you go in sewing, the better your project will look. All right, so once you near the end, we're going to do the same thing that we did in the beginning. I'm going to take my sewing stiletto and I'm going to push my zipper pull to the side as I finish off the stitch. Now remember when you're sewing that your hands are not pushing or pulling on the fabric. You are just using your hands to guide the fabric. That is what the feed dogs are for. They will move your fabric along for you. Now you'll know the drill, backstitch at the end and you are all finished. All right, there we have it. This is what it should look like when you're all finished. Now all we have to do is take out our basting stitch and then seam rip the seam. See how we got that nice, perfect 90-degree angle with the corners there. I'm going to go in with my seam ripper and start taking out the hand sewn basting stitch, and then I'm going to seam rip the seam so that we can use our zipper. Go slow with seam ripping. I'd be lying if I didn't say that I have ripped fabric a time or two because I went too fast. All right, I'm all done seam ripping. Now I'm just going to pick at the threads that are still in the fabric and clean it up a bit. And voila, we have a finished centered zipper. And then once I'm done, I like to lightly go over it with my steamer. All right, now that we're done sewing in the zipper, the last thing that we have to do is sew in our zipper stop and then finish off this raw edge of the zipper. Okay, so what you want to do is grab your hand sewing needles and your thread. And what I'm going to do is lift up the end of my zipper there so that I can see the zipper teeth facing up. And then I'm going to sew underneath that zipper teeth and pull the thread through. And then just keep repeating that until you have a good amount of stitches in. You don't have to use silky thread for this part. You can use regular polyester thread. It's totally up to you. And this is what it should look like on the other side. Once you have enough stitches in, just tie a knot and cut the loose threads, and you are all finished sewing your zipper stop. All right, and the final thing we have to do is just finish off the raw edge of the zipper, and it's actually pretty easy. What I use is Fray Check. Fray Check is just a liquid that you put along the raw edge, and you wait for it to dry, and it will prevent it from fraying. It's very easy, but it's definitely not the most aesthetically pleasing. So another option for when doing a zipper is you can do a bias bound seam. Like I did here with this invisible zipper, how you do this is you finish off the bottom of the zipper with bias tape, and then you're going to go in and encase the zipper and the seam allowance on the sides there. Now, if you do decide to use bias tape with a centered zipper, you want to make sure that your seam allowance is at least an inch, because when we top stitch the centered zipper, we lose a little bit of that seam allowance, and you want to make sure that you have enough room for that bias tape on the side there. But that's just if you want to go the extra mile and have your inside be extra pretty. Serging the seam allowance and adding fray check to the zipper will do just fine. All right, that is it for the centered zipper tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button to know when I have new tutorials up. And don't forget to like this video, it'll help me out so much. Feel free to drop any questions you have below in the comments, and also if you have any video requests. I get a lot of my video ideas from what you guys have asked in the comments, so feel free to let me know. I will see you in my next sewing tutorial. Mwah.